If you found yourself at this video, it's most likely because you're contemplating taking apart your Gerber multi-tool and have the good sense to see if there's a video on it before you begin, or you've taken apart your Gerber multi-tool and now have come to find that reassembly is really quite a challenge. Well, that's the way I started. I took it apart, never thinking that it would be much of a challenge to put it back together. And it comes apart very simply. I'll talk about that in a second. But it's the putting it together which is really quite a problem and makes for some really bad YouTube videos, including a couple that specifically are what you do not do, which is essentially look like a watchmaker with the shakes. The way to approach this is to first know what you've got yourself into. The whole thing disassembles with a star drive. And I read the reviews or the comments below a lot of these videos. Folks, this is made in 2019. Starting around 2015, if you didn't have a good set of star drives, you really shouldn't be doing these kinds of projects. Just go on eBay or wherever you normally buy your tools and buy a good full set of hardened star drives, and everything will be so much easier. But you use the star drive first to remove the two screws on either side of this plastic plate, watching out for the spring when you take apart the actual plier head. When you do, it'll be held in a plastic piece like this with two screws, and that spring is behind it. Just make sure you have both of them. I'm going to put these pieces aside now. They're the last thing you put in when you do the reassembly, and I use a bucket here so that I don't lose anything, and you should too. Now here's where it gets interesting. The problem with reassembly is in the washers. There are two types. There's the oblong washer with a nipple and the round washer. The round washer will be the last washer you put on. And the reason why the last washer doesn't have a nipple is because the nipples keep the washers from rotating between bits. In other words, when you lift this bit up out of your multi-tool, if there's a series of washers that aren't held, the other pieces will lift as well. It's that nipple placed inside of this notch right here that is the problem in reassembly. And the reason why it's a problem is this spring-loaded plate. It makes it very difficult to manage all of the pieces and these washers with a spring-loaded plate in its full fired position. So you'll be assembling it after we lock this plate back. This plate is the spring-loaded release lock. It slides, so I'm going to show you a simple way that you can lock this back. Hang on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a square piece of whatever plastic in this groove right behind the base of this. And I'm using these two jaws to hold this spring back. Watch as I set it up. All right, find any bit of plastic that will fill that void for this side, getting it above the lip so you can use this device to hold it without crushing the spring. Nothing should get close to that spring in there. On the other side, I've pulled it all the way back, and now it's under quite a bit of pressure. Now I don't have to worry about this sliding forward, which is actually the lockup mechanism on the pieces, and it will disturb your ability to slip those washers into that slot. That's the first thing. Well, I've slipped in the female tube all the way across so you can see that the square tip comes through the frame. That's why you don't need a washer on this side. It's already built in. Now know the order of your tools. You get to know the first one. In this case, it's the saw. And if you look on the other side, you'll see the other side has got the scissors. So it's the ones in the middle that you can either take a picture of your knife before you take it apart, or you can just arrange them as you want. After every piece comes a nipple washer. I'm going to do the first couple of them. Well, I've laid the pieces that go on this side out. I know what the first one is. It's the saw blade, and the last one is the screwdriver. You can really use any order you want for the ones in the middle. From the factory, the ones that I put in the middle are in an order, but I'm just going to reassemble them the way I like them. The thing I want you to realize is in this picture, there's one of them that is not in the right position. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. The right position requires this little dip here, 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 and here to be on the same side as that slot. Well, this one isn't. So this is actually not in the correct position. You want this dip facing the frame. In other words, when you lay this in, that dip is going towards the notch. I'll put a few in. Well, I'm not the greatest photographer, but I put the first one in. Remember, it doesn't need a washer on the side facing what will be the square end of this, but it does between every piece. And the way you lay it in is you lay the washer so that little nipple is ready to drop into that cutout groove. So one is done. I'm going to stack a few more. Between each one will be one of these nipple washers. Well, I've laid in 3. I laid in the saw blade, the awl, and the Phillips head. And between each one is a nippled washer. Also, that little cutout, as you see, is facing the shelf as well. I'm going to continue by adding one more washer on top of this. I'm almost done. I've got a stack here, all of them with the nipple washers in the right direction and the pieces lined up as well. Just know that the scissors is a 2-piece affair. Assemble it so that the little piece, which has a point on it, goes into the frame underneath. The last thing that goes on, the last piece at the very end, is that round nippleless washer. And if you look closely, you'll see that some of the nipples are pointing in all directions. I'm going to now turn them so they're facing that cutout that you can see, so they drop in. Now I want you to look very closely. All of those nipples are ready to fall in, but in order for me to really get them to slip in there, I've got to pop out the end here and give it enough room to move them into the groove. This is probably the hardest part of the operation because you will find that that round washer, the nippleless one at the very end, in this case right on top of the scissors, can fall out. Make sure it doesn't, but you need to give it enough space to roll those in. I'll push them into place with a toothpick or something like that. If you leave something in the hole when you do this, which also helps you push it back out a little bit, you won't lose that round washer. Oh, I wish I had an extra set of hands, but if you look inside this window, you can see that all those nipples are lined up. I know the washer's still on because I left that stick in the hole here. It all reassembled. Now, the square is ready to get in through the frame, but before we do that, I'm just going to screw in the top. All both sides are screwed together. We check one more time, and sure enough, all the nipples are in the window. It's time to release our clamp. And there we have it. Everything nice and tight. You can use Loctite on the end. Just don't use the Loctite that likes to use heat in order to release it. Now, how will you know if you got it right? Well, first off, when you slide this back, you want to see all of the pins. I'm sorry, the focus is so poor on this. Inside that groove. And then when you pull up one tool, just one, it should only come up by itself. If it's a little tight, this is tight. I'm going to back it off a bit. There we go. Now when you pull up a tool, one should come up, and you should get a nice click, and it should feel right and tight. No movement. If you've got movement here, it means that that nipple is not in the right place. Now all you do for this one is you slip the gear set for the actual pliers through the frame like this, put on your springs, and put your screws back in. And that's it. You've done it. I hope this helped.